This has been a really special day for me, I have to admit. I mean, I'm surrounded by superstars today. We started our program this morning with the Fox News Channel's chief political anchor and anchor of special report. Bret Baier, for example, was on with us earlier this morning talking about his special tonight at 10 o'clock. And lo and behold, here I am again with someone else at the top of their field, and known as one of the nation's leading financial experts and has been for over 25 years. Dennis Tubbegen is here, and Dennis, it's an honor to have you in our studio this morning.
Well, Neil, it's very much a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for having me.
I had no idea. I was talking to our mutual friend Jeremy yesterday. I had no idea you had written so many books, and now I discover that the New Rules for Retirement is now a bestseller.
A bestseller on Amazon, yeah. It's very flattering.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you very much.
Moving a lot of property and helping people decipher this financial world of ours. As I told you before we went on, I'm really not a money guy. I watch it. I watch the markets. Fortunately, I have people like you to listen to. Which, by the way, our audience can. It's the Everything Financial Show on Wood Radio, Sundays, 9 to 10 a.m. You should never miss that program, and it's very successful across the country. Tell us about the new book and what we can take from this.
Well, Neil, in the book, I talk about the 3 new rules of retirement that everybody should know if they want to have enough money to retire. In fact, the Employee Benefit Research Institute recently did a study that concluded that 78% of Americans aren't confident they'll have enough money to retire. And these 3 new rules of retirement, I think, are going to be essential for people to understand if they want to retire comfortably, and for those who are already retired if they want to keep the money that they have. Now, these 3 rules, well, you're a radio guy, so I'll illustrate this with money, because I know radio guys have a lot of money.
Boy, are you misinformed.
Well, I'm sure if you look in your wallet, there's a whole bunch of 50s. So let me illustrate the first rule with a $50 bill. And you can remember this by just looking at the picture on the $50 bill. It's a picture of President Ulysses Grant.
Oh, thanks for telling me.
Yeah.
I haven't seen one of those in some time.
You have to change 100 in order to see it, Neil. But President Grant, a lot of people don't know, President Grant died broke. He died penniless, and he was a smart guy. He was a
radio guy, too?
Yeah. he may have been in the early days, yeah. But President Grant died broke because he didn't understand this 2-bucket rule and fell victim to it. So what is this 2-bucket rule? Well, Wall Street wants you to invest by putting all your money in one bucket. And in this bucket, they've got typically a couple types of investments, stocks and bonds. And stocks and bonds are good investments. However, there are some periods of time when stocks and bonds don't do very well. And President Grant lost his rather significant net worth during the financial crisis of the 1870s because he didn't understand and implement this 2-bucket rule. Now, the second rule is illustrated. Maybe this is a bill you'd be more familiar with. It's a $5 bill. And on that...
I've seen those.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a portrait of President Lincoln. Okay. Now, President Lincoln had to figure out how to finance the Civil War. And if you go back and look at how money works, many times in U.S. history, money's been backed by gold. But then every now and then, politicians eliminate this link between the dollar and gold. Well, why do they do this? Well, if they have a significant financial problem to solve, they have 3 choices. They can either raise taxes, which is not a good way to get reelected. They can cut spending, also not politically popular, taking away benefits from those that are expecting them. Or, number 3, they can print money. And that's what they often do. And that's what they did to finance the Civil War. They're doing it again today, and that's why it's important to understand the effects of this 2-bucket rule, this evolving money rule, which leads me to my third rule of retirement, which is best illustrated by thinking of the picture on a $10 bill, which is Alexander Hamilton. Now, Alexander Hamilton is known as the nation's first Treasury Secretary, but I call him the father of money printing in the United States. After the Revolutionary War, he went to President Washington and said, "Hey, George, we've got a problem here. We've got all this debt from the Revolutionary War, and I think we need to print money in order to pay off the debt." Well, he got Washington to agree to that, and a bank was set up to print paper money. And whenever money is printed, certain predictable economic conditions emerge. You have prosperity that is really a prosperity illusion that emerges for a while, and then too much debt is added to the system. And when you have too much debt in the financial system, bad things happen financially. And when these bad things happen financially, We call that an economic winter, and I believe, given that we've printed a lot of money since the financial crisis, we are now once again entering an economic winter.
That doesn't sound like a good thing.
Well, whenever money is printed to try to alleviate the symptoms of debt, which is essentially what the Fed said this past week. I mean, Janet Yellen didn't come out and say they were going to print money or use quantitative easing again, but she left the door open for it. So what I talk about, if listeners want to have enough money to retire and if they want to keep the money that they have to use their head. And H is to hedge against evolving money. Use and understand the two-bucket rule. E, embrace diversity. Use asset classes or a combination thereof that will tend to perform well no matter what economic season we find ourselves in.
Spread things out.
Spread things out. A, avoid asset bubbles. This is the killer for a lot of people. Take somebody that had money in real estate 10 years ago when the real estate bubble crashed. That's a perfect example of an asset bubble.
Yeah.
No fun to participate in. And D, don't lose money. Warren Buffett says there are two rules to understand if you want to be a successful investor. Rule number 1, don't lose money. And rule number 2, never forget rule number 1. So that's the head formula to navigate this economic winter that we believe lies ahead.
Well, for a lot of us, it's really difficult to get started. I mean, you can put a few dollars away and have a little, savings going. But I mean, I raised 4 sons, and by the time you get everybody, fed, clothed, educated, and all of that, and they're finally on their own, you're creeping up on 50, and that's when a lot of people are going, rut-row.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you look at, there's demographic research that concludes that we, on average, spend the most money between the ages of 46 and 50. And that's for exactly the reasons you outlined. We've got kids driving cars. We've got kids in college. And once we become an empty nester, that's when we can really start to save for retirement. So that's not unusual. But that's also indicative of this economic winter in which we find ourselves. Because when you look at the population, a big part of the U.S. population are the baby boomers. And the baby boomers now are past those peak spending years. So that means that a consumer spending dependent U.S. economy, we're 70% dependent on consumers going out and spending money. The baby boomers aren't doing it, and their children, the millennials, aren't quite there. So that's another economic headwind that we think people need to be aware of.
Well, the baby boomers are hoping that they're going to have this little stipend called Social Security to help over the bump. The millennials don't believe that there's ever going to be such a thing for them, correct?
Well, if you look at, I always tell people when I'm speaking, and I write about it in the book, and incidentally, if your listeners want to get a free copy of the New Retirement Rules book, we'll make it available. They can just visit newretirementrulesbook.com, and we'll be glad to send them a copy. But getting back to Social Security, Professor Lawrence Kotlikoff has been a guest on the Everything Financial radio program several times, and he has served on the Council of Economic Advisors for Presidents Reagan and Clinton. So he's a very bright man. And he said if you look at the Detroit bankruptcy, one of the leading problems was an underfunded pension program. And the pension program was about 20% underfunded. Social Security presently is 30% underfunded. So there's going to have to be some big changes in Social Security. The millennials probably aren't going to retire at 66. They're going to probably retire at 75 or something like that.
Well, we're seeing life expectancy expand. We're seeing better health care, for example. People are living longer. And I know a lot of people who technically retired from their job, but they didn't want to retire because they wanted to be active and productive.
Well, absolutely. In fact, life expectancies, I just interviewed a gentleman who'll be on the program on Sunday who put that in perspective for me. Every 10 years, life expectancies increase 2 years. So if you just think about the effect that's had on the way we plan for retirement using normal, conventional tools, it just dictates that things are going to have to change and people have to look to plan for retirement, maybe using some different tools or some additional tools as opposed to the one-bucket approach.
Let me ask you something that really doesn't have anything to do about retirement rules, but I'm concerned about the effect that it has on the economy. This $19 trillion in debt and our extremely overburdened social programs. If you were advising the administration, what would you do to solve a national crisis like that?
I would probably resign. I'm just kidding. Well, if you look at the numbers, we have a $19 trillion federal debt. According to the Social Security Program's trustees, Social Security is underfunded by about $17 trillion. And according to former Dallas Federal Reserve Bank Richard Fisher, Medicare is underfunded by $85 trillion. So just add those numbers together, and you're at about $122 trillion. And to put that in perspective, if you file a tax return and you're listening to this program, your share of that problem is almost $1.4 million.
I'm in trouble.
So the reality is it's not going to be solved by raising taxes. If it's solved by cutting spending, we turn into Greece. We have a significant deflationary situation, and that's a problem. So unfortunately, maybe they go back to the printing press.
Do you think the markets are going to be somewhat stable for a while?
I don't. I think a lot of it depends on what the Fed does. If the Fed decides to print, I think stocks stay up. If they don't, I happen to believe the highs in the market were reached in May of last year, and they're going to go a lot lower.
Another interest rate increase would stop it in its tracks?
I would say that an interest rate reduction and maybe a talk of quantitative easing would make the market rally. Whenever the Fed decides to print money, it's kind of crack for the market. They go, all right, here we go. But as soon as they quit, it's like, uh-oh, where did the drug go? And that's really what we're dealing with here. So I think that barring more stimulus from the Fed, markets over the next several years will have to go lower.
I can't wait to read this book. I really can't. It's an Amazon bestseller. It's the new rules for retirement. And pleasure having you. I hope you come back.
I would love to come back. I had a lot of fun. Thank you.
Interesting guy and a show you should never miss, the Everything Financial Show. It's on Wood Radio, Sunday mornings, 9 to 10. You'll be amazed the benefit and what you can learn, so make sure you don't miss it. Dennis Tubbegen, our guest here, author of the new Retirement Rules, and we'll return in just a moment here on West Michigan Live News Radio, Wood 1300 and 106.9 FM.